Hello, this is the Harboring Light. I'm Mary. I give a conservative perspective about the world around me. So, I will link all the social media, email, and Substack. And ratings are greatly important. I appreciate all you listeners out there, and feedback would be greatly appreciated. So, won't you give me a rating on all the platforms that I'm on? And questions, comments, concerns, just email me. And also, I'm working on it and revving that up and everything. And I'm going to be sending out on Substack mock-ups about merchandise. And you can pick what you like and give me questions, comments, concerns on that too. Okay, so audio platforms, just naming a few here. Audible, Amazon Music, Spotify for podcasters, Pandora, and I'm pushing out to where I'm on all of the podcast platforms. So this episode is about Australia and Aborigines music and the traditions and folk with that. And also I'm going to add a little flair to it. On Friday, on Wednesday I'm going to break everything apart. I'm gonna first on Wednesday talk about their Aborigines music, and on Friday I'm gonna end by talking about music from Australia, from in the 80s and since, and my perspective and my taste for music about it and the flair about it and everything, in particular Australian musicians that I like, and give thoughts about it and everything else. And also, let's get back to this episode. I'm going to cover and talk about the background and everything of Australia and the Aborigines music particularly. Alright, so let's dive in to this charted territory. Here we go. Okay, so Australia, Aboriginal music, following storylines. So Australia's history is remarkable in that it stretches back to at least 50,000 years, and the indigenous people of Australia are a part of the world's oldest cultures, preserving their ancient heritage through a complex of oral traditions of mythological Dreamtime stories, music that has always played a central role in maintaining cultural identity, from the traditional sounds of voice, from slapstick on to the didgeridoo, through onto contemporary songs, singers, songwriters, and rock bands. Australia's indigenous music continues to evolve in very fascinating ways. Okay. In the Dreamtime, Aboriginal creation myths tell of a legendary Tomic beings who wandered over the content of the Dreamtime, singing out the names of everything that crossed their path, animals, plants, rocks, water holes, and so singing the world into existence. The songlines are paths which can be traced across the continent, liking sacred scripts that have returned to the land. Thus, they define the intangible relationships between Aboriginal music, beliefs, and the land. Alright, so briefly, getting down to history. The indigenous people of Australia are thought to have arrived between 40 and 100,000 years ago. In 1770, English explorer James Cook claimed the continent for Britain, which he justified by the legal concept of no man's land, a distinctive European idea defined as an absence of civilization. From 1788, the indigenous people were driven off their ancestral, that is, lands and resettled or hunted and killed like animals. Such brutal practices persist until well into the 20th century. And discrimination has continued with the recognition of Aboriginal rights, a relatively recent development. European settlements also meant the suppression of traditional culture, the importance of disease, and the forced removal of Aboriginal children from their families. There are currently over 450,000 people in Australia who identify themselves as Indigenous, and some 200 surviving languages. All right. Since 1950s, on the strongest influence on contemporary Aboriginal music has been country music. Adapting the traditional of campfire singing, Aboriginal singers such as Jimmy Little have had continued success. Other prominent country-influenced performers are songwriters including Bob Randall and the Pegram Brothers. And I'll go into further depth about those on Wednesday. Reggae roots. The real revolution in Aboriginal music began in the late 1970s with the documentary film Wrong Side of the Road, showing the rock band's No Fixed Address and us mob struggling to get exposure for their reggae influence. It marked the beginning of a public recognition of music as a tool and the fight to communicate the Aboriginal story. And I'll go into depth and about this part on Wednesday. Of course, I'm mentioning the artists, the singers, musicians. All right. The number of Aboriginal rock bands formed over the past 3 decades in a phenomenal way. Okay. And these bands attracted attention as the first mixed Aboriginal and white group mixing in both tribal language and English. And I will go into depth about this particular band on Wednesday. Since 1990, there has been continuous development within the indigenous rock reggae scene, with most new bands coming from regions around Darwin, Alice Springs, and Aboriginal control Arnhem Land. The most prominent groups have been the Saltwater Band, and I will go into depth about the other bands. Saltwater Band, just to name a few. So, Aboriginal rock are associated with the struggle of Aboriginal rights. Okay, so singer-songwriters. Assimilation was the term for a policy practiced up until the 1960s for taking children from their parents and raising them in white foster homes or institutions. Many were literally kidnapped and told that their parents were dead. 3 of them, Kev Carmody, Archie Roach, and his wife Ruby Hunter, have become major singer-songwriters and are today among the most powerful indigenous voice of Australia. Carmody is the leading volunteer for Aboriginal concerns and has been dubbed Australia's Dylan, as in Bob Dylan. He is especially contemptuous of the hypocrisy of British colonizers, a theme brilliantly developed in the song Thou Shalt Not Steal. Kev Carmody. The rise of female Aboriginal performers performers have greatly broadened the perspective of Australian Indigenous music. The vocal trio Tidas enjoyed a popular career of close harmony before disbanding in 2000. Other notable male singer-songwriters include Frank Yama and Dan Sultan. However, the most recent success story has been the phenomenal rise of Jeffrey Yuma Pigu, and I'll go into more depth about that on Wednesday. Born from birth, his remarkably pure and gentle voice has propelled him to the forefront of the Australian Indigenous music scene. Multicultural Australia has also become the adopted home for numerous migrant musicians. The result has been a vibrant local world music scene in the most major cities. So, the Whoa Mad Festival since 1992 and many other regional festivals contain a strong world music component. So it's this prominent to non-Indigenous acts, including Australian, Egyptian, and other things of this nature, and singer-songwriters of Russian descent. Alright, so I want to end by saying these things. I think it's very interesting, merging the rich history and the tradition and the culture of the Aborigines people, and also within that digging deep into the harsh reality of the harsh colonization and the homogenization, so to speak, of the Aborigines culture and how that tied into the history of Australia. And I think it's something when you bring in music to address these issues, and to also, on a positive note, to talk about the rich history and how it's an integral part of the staple of Australia. And I think also with the bad of everything of uprooting and the change and the harsh reality of the colonization of the Aborigines people into the the British colonization and all of this other Australian culture, using music to I think it helps get to a better place, to bring that bind together and to understand things from a different point of view. Now, as I mentioned, we'll talk about rock music particularly. Well, I start out on Wednesday with Aborigines music and then move on to talk about particularly Australian artists that I find interesting from the 80s, and talk about that and how that melded and changed the atmosphere of the arena of music. Alright, so this reaches the end of the Harboring Light. Tune in, turn up, and as Vitamin C says, put a smile on your face and make the world a better place. And also to add on to this, feedback is greatly important. I appreciate all you listeners out there. So reach out to me, whether it be email or Substack. Be greatly appreciated. And also, as I mentioned about merchandise, now I'm working on this and see how things work. So possibly at the end of the summer. But I'm working on earlier. We'll see how things turn out. I'm going to post a mock-up on Substack about the different merchandise, and y'all can get feedback, vote what you like, what you don't like for merchandise. All right, so on to Wednesday. Take care. Bye-bye now.